My name is David Doty, and welcome to the Estero Ekklesia podcast. We are going to begin today with the word ecclesia and what that means. There's a lot of, confusion about what that word means because it's translated as church in almost every modern English translation of the Bible in the New Testament, except for a few places, but most Christians don't know that because most people don't know that they need to research it. Unfortunately, we only know what we know. And obviously, we don't know what we don't know. And so even every work is fallible. Even Strong's Concordance is not perfect. When that was being compiled, they did the best they could, and it's an incredible tool. It's an incredible tool. It's useful for all of us, and I'm going to be using it today in this talk. But we need to sometimes go beyond modern commentaries and go back in history to get an accurate picture of what a word meant to the person who used it. So we are going to be going all the way back to Matthew chapter 16, and I'm going to share my screen here for those of you who might be watching rather than just listening, because it's important, and I want everyone to see what it is that we're looking at. In Matthew 16, Jesus takes the disciples all the way up to this place that is commonly known as the gate to the underworld. And it was at this place called Caesarea Philippi where he asked the disciples, "Who is it that people say the Son of Man is?" Son of Man was a title that he used for himself. And they said, some say you are John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Jesus said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter replied in verse 16, "You are the Christ," or the Messiah, "the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you," in verse 18, "you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." We're going to stop right there. That word church in most of our English translations is actually the Greek word ekklesia. And that's important because the word ecclesia does not mean church. It never did, and it never will. What does ecclesia actually mean then? Well, I'm pulling up the interlinear translation, and this is through the website BibleHub.com. I recommend everybody use it or Blue Letter Bible or some other tool to look beyond the English translations, because as good as all of them are, none of them are perfect, not even your beloved King James. That word ecclesia Jesus used, the Greek word that's translated church, does not mean church. And I can prove this to you biblically, and we will get there in just a minute. But first, let's look at the dictionary definition, and this is using Strong's Concordance, of this word ecclesia. That's most often translated as church, but is usually translated as assembly or congregation in some other translations. The dictionary definition is a calling out. It's a called out assembly of citizens, specifically of Christ, the community of the redeemed of Christ, whether being on earth, or in heaven, or both. And you can see Strong's Exhaustive Concordance translates it assembly or church. It's a compound word of two Greek words, ek, meaning to or from, and kaleo, meaning to call. A people called out to or from something. And we know that Christians are called out of the world. We are called to heaven, but it's important that we understand it's much more than just the dictionary definition. It's much more than just the sum of these two words put together. The word ecclesia was used in the Roman government and in the Greek government prior to the Roman Empire taking over from the Greek Empire, because it was a Greek word, originating several hundred years before Jesus came and was walking in the flesh. The word ecclesia referred to the ruling town council. It was the democratic collection of men who sat at the city gates, and they were in every city-state within the Greek Empire. They were a democratic delegation that represented the empire on the local level. They enforced the rules of the empire. They were in charge of imports and exports, immigration, and they would decide matters that were in contention between citizens. They were the judges who sat at the city gates that made sure everything within their city-state was flowing smoothly. This concept of having an ecclesia in each town worked so well for the Greek Empire. The Roman Empire that arose next adopted this same practice. When Jesus was speaking to the disciples, they were under Roman occupation. When they would travel to and from Jerusalem and other cities, there was an ecclesia everywhere they went. They knew exactly what Jesus was referring to when he said he was establishing his ecclesia based on the fact, the heavenly revelation, that he was the Son of God, that he was the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, the prophet like Moses, whom they had been waiting for thousands of years. Now, some people might have questions because we have to go outside of the Bible to understand that history that was taking place and the governmental structure that existed during the time of Jesus. And some people are going to say, well, you can't believe everything you read on the internet. Some of you are going to say, well, because the Bible doesn't say that, we can't trust it. And for those who dissent, I would like to direct you to Acts chapter 19. I've got Acts 19 and the ESV pulled up here, and this is when Paul is in Ephesus. Verse 8 says he spoke in the synagogue for 3 months, boldly reasoning and persuading them about the kingdom of God. And eventually a riot breaks out because Paul is having such an impact for the kingdom of God that the idol sales are dropping, and the local silversmiths are getting upset. Verse 24 says, a man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen in similar trades and said, men, you know from this business we have our wealth. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but also in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that the gods made with hands are not gods. And there is a danger that this trade of ours might come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship. When the other silversmiths heard this from Demetrius, they were enraged, and they were crying out, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. So the city was filled with confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. But when Paul wished to go in among the crowd, the disciples would not let him. And even some of his friends, even some of the Asiarchs who were friends of his, sent to him urging him not to venture into the theater. It was just chaotic. They didn't want him to get hurt. Now some cried out one thing, some another, for the assembly, in verse 32, was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. So in verse 32 of Acts 19, that word translated assembly is actually ecclesia. It's the exact same word that's translated church 114 other times in the New Testament, but for some reason in Acts 19, it is translated as assembly in the ESV and many other translations. Some others might use the word congregation. Why is it, do you suppose, that Acts 19 has ecclesia as assembly or congregation and not as church? The answer is quite obvious, because it's not talking about Christians, it's talking about pagans in Ephesus. Why is it that Aristarchus and Gaius were dragged into the theater before the assembly? Because the assembly The Ecclesia was referring to the local political body, the governing authority in the town of Ephesus, and how it's translated in all of our English translations shows us emphatically that the word ecclesia means much more than just assembly. Let's look at verse 32 once again. Some cried out one thing, some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had been convened or why they had come together. There was an official meeting called. The assembly, the ecclesia, was convened. This was a governmental meeting, and we'll see this confirmed later in the chapter. Some of the crowd prompted Alexander, whom the Jews had put forward, and Alexander, motioning with his hand, wanted to make a defense to the crowd. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, for about 2 hours they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." When the town clerk, this is another governmental employee, showing further that this is not just some random group of citizens, but this is an official meeting. When the town clerk, in verse 35, had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper of the great Artemis and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky? Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. You have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. If therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly." Some translations would, instead of regular assembly, say a legal assembly. In other words, the assembly, the ecclesia that is currently convened to try these men is illegal. It's irregular. It's not okay. And verse 40, "For we really are in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there's no cause that we can give to justify this commotion." And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly, the ecclesia. So we see in verse 32, in verse 39, and in verse 41, that word ecclesia is used. And instead of being translated as church, like it is the other 114 times it's used in the New Testament, here it is translated as assembly, and it very clearly is referring to an official governmental group that had legislative authority in the city of Ephesus. The only reason that our Bibles do not translate this word as church is because it's clearly not referring to followers of Jesus Christ. However, it's the same word, and it paints a very clear picture of what the word ecclesia meant 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire. That's going to be it for me for today, but I hope you found this helpful. For more, go to esteroekklesia.com. We've got a link to a TikTok channel there, as well as information on how to reach me. You can send me your questions, send me your disagreements. I'd love to have a conversation with you. If you'd like to know more about Ecclesia or about Estero Ekklesia in particular, an in-person gathering in Southwest Florida, or check out Estero Ekklesia online, this community where we have lots of conversations and different Bible studies going all the time. You can learn more about all these things at esteroekklesia.com. God bless you. See you next time.